Hi, welcome to the CIDCI online Salon series. I'm Margie O'Driscoll, and on behalf of the CIDCI Board of Directors, I'd like to welcome you here today. CIDCI's mission is to accelerate change in the built environment by convening innovators for educational programs. We also serve as a trusted source of information about innovation. Special thanks to all of our sponsors who make this possible. Here's a bit of information about how today's session will work. We're recording the session and we'll place a recording on the CIDCI website as soon as possible. If you have questions or comments, please use the chat box and we'll take as many questions as we can following the presentation. About today's discussion. These are unprecedented times filled with fear, uncertainty, and social turmoil. The pandemic has laid bare the systemic inequalities in America, forcing many, for the first time, to examine injustices centuries in the making. Thousands are marching in the streets, mostly wearing masks, to demand justice. Some businesses have responded by posting statements of empathy and support on social media. With these posts, some consider their work done. In fact, this work is far from finished. In a survey released just yesterday by the University of Chicago, the #1 issue for 18 to 35-year-olds in America is racism. Today, Tim Coldwell, a former CIDCI board member and president of the Canadian construction firm Chandos, will be joined by Afdhel Aziz. Afdhel is the founder of Conspiracy of Love, one of the world's leading brand purpose consultancies, whose clients include Adidas, Red Bull, Facebook, Microsoft, and Oreo, among others. They're going to discuss impact sourcing, which they both consider the next opportunity for the AEC industry after IPD. How's that for a lot of acronyms? As companies explore how to support underserved communities in an equitable way. Welcome, Tim. Welcome, Afdhel. Tim, I think you're going to get us started.
Great. Thank you, Margie, for the introduction. And yeah, I'm excited to be here today. Just as a little bit of introduction, I'll just talk about how I know Afdhel. And then I think what he'll do is he'll canvass the waterfront, so to speak, just to kind of provide state of the union in terms of purpose in the business world. And then we'll dive deeper into this idea of impact sourcing. But Afdhel and I have known each other, it's almost about 2 years now. And we ran a cross-country tour in Canada called Industry with Purpose. About 3,000 people attended. And as part of that, I got to know Afdhel and frankly became friends with him. And he worked with us on re-articulating and refining Chandos's purpose, vision, mission, values, and position. For those of you who are listening and are running an organization that believes purpose is key to success, I would say Afdhel is one of the best in the world, if not the best in the world, and certainly a great person to talk to in terms of some consulting work with your organization around purpose and brand. But I think what I'll do is I'll throw it over to Afdhel. You can introduce yourself and give us kind of the lay of the land, Afdhel.
Sure. Thank you, Tim. And yeah, pleasure to be here with you, everybody. I'm coming to you from Los Angeles, California. Yeah, as Tim mentioned, I'm a geek about purpose, about the idea that business should be a force for good. My background is I spent 20 years inside these large corporations like Nokia, Procter & Gamble, Heineken, Absolute Vodka, doing brand management and marketing. And somewhere along the way, I became disillusioned by my life's legacy being that I helped sell more vodka or sell more beer. And I wrote this book, Good is the New Cool, Market Like You Give a Damn, now available on Amazon, which was really about, in 2016, about this brand new idea that brands should stand for doing good. An idea that has now exploded, right? So if you think about Nike with Colin Kaepernick or Pepsi with Kendall Jenner, to give you a example of how not to do it. This topic of brand purpose is kind of now almost well-defined and in the mainstream. And it's backed up really by this massive tectonic shifts of consumers who want the brands in their lives to stand up for their values and add positive impact to the world. Employees who want to work for those companies. And thirdly, the rise of impact investors who are now looking for places to invest their money in line with their values as well. So these three big tectonic shifts, we believe, are going to affect corporations as much as the advent of digital did. It is transformative to think about these three kind of massive shifts in those stakeholders. And so what I did in 2016 after the book came out was set up Conspiracy of Love, which is a brand purpose consultancy. And we work with a variety of different brands, whether they're in different sectors like CPG. So we work with Oreo cookies or Red Bull. We work in fashion with folks like Adidas. And we had the pleasure and honor of working with Chandos, which, if you don't know, is an incredible example in the construction industry of how to do good. It is a B Corporation, which is a certification. I think there's only 3,300 in the world. Companies who embed the idea of doing good into their charter. They are 100% employee owned, which is another, I think, a really important frontier in helping build equity. They employ sustainable construction practices like IPD. And one of the most interesting things, which Tim and I will jump into, is this whole idea of impact sourcing and how it should be not just about how you build buildings, but who builds them with you and who do you employ to help make that happen as well. So the fascinating moment that we find ourselves in is that this topic has exploded in the last 3 months because of COVID-19, the pandemic itself, because of the economic devastation caused by it. And then on top of that, the racial injustice that has exploded into the public consciousness. All of these things have made consumer expectations of corporations and the role they play accelerate. So all those trends we were seeing before this happened have now kind of firmly shifted this topic from niche to mainstream. When you look at all the data, people are saying, I want corporations to work alongside government to help solve these problems that we are seeing, like COVID-19 and racial justice. In fact, some data suggests consumers say, I don't think we're going to make it through unless corporations get involved in helping to solve these problems. So it's a sea change, really. And the encouraging news is all the data shows that those companies that put purpose at their core are more profitable. They attract better employees who are more engaged and motivated. They're able to see white space opportunities in businesses and areas that don't occur to their competition. And they attract the kind of patient capital and investment whose values are aligned with theirs as well. So all the data shows that purpose-driven companies, Kantar has an amazing study which shows that purpose-driven companies outperform their competition by 175% in terms of growth metrics as well. So the business case for purpose is also now very clearly defined alongside that societal shift. And so what I think we are about to enter is really the age of purpose, where this idea that business needs to reboot what it stands for. It needs to reboot itself to still keep all the good things about business, innovation, agility, the ability to take risks, but now do it in a way that contributes to not the detriment of society by contributing to income inequality or to climate change, but really to creating a more prosperous and fair and equitable society for everybody as well. So this is the moment we find ourselves in. I think it's fascinating when you look at the construction industry itself. One of the things I do is I write for Forbes, and yesterday I had a conversation with Fifth Wall, which is a venture capital fund, which has also just become a B Corp, one of the largest funds focused on real estate and technology. And I said, why is a VC fund becoming a B Corp? And their thesis was exactly what I just laid out. They feel like it's not only is it imperative for companies to think about sustainability, but it's also profitable. So there's something going on. I think that's where when we were invited by CIDCI to come and have this conversation, we welcome this as an opportunity to broaden the conversation and dive a little bit deeper as well.
You know, I'll jump in and add a bit of context. A lot of the folks on the call are in the Bay Area and do a lot of work with tech companies. And the tech companies in the United States are certainly waking up to this idea of impact sourcing. So there's an organization called the Global Impact Sourcing Coalition, gisc.bsr.org. And if you look at their steering committee, Facebook, Google, SAP, they're the founding members. And we see this happening in Canada as well. You know, in Canada, it's interesting. And most of the IPD, highly collaborative projects in the United States were done by private organizations. In Canada, there's about 35 or so of them, IPD projects, pure polyparty IPD. Chandos is doing about 27 of those. And I would say all but 2 or 3 are being done by government organizations. So public work is very good work in Canada, and is usually delivered in collaborative delivery methods. And we're seeing across Canada, from the federal government to the provinces to the municipalities, government going to an impact sourcing way of being, which means 15% of the selection criteria for the general contractor or the architect is based on what social good will that general contractor or architect do as part of their business model on the project. And so for us, hiring at-risk youth is an example, and I've got a personal connection to that we'll share. And this is not just happening in Canada. Australia and New Zealand is very far advanced in this regard. And the UK, particularly Ireland, is very far advanced. In fact, they've gone so far as to say that their preferred form of a corporation is actually a social enterprise in Ireland. And so I think we're just seeing the tip of the iceberg. And the really interesting thing that we can do as a contractor and as a designer is the idea of layering impact sourcing into IPD. And, you know, you do a values alignment on an IPD project, you start talking about what social impact will this project have in the local community? And how can we demonstrate that that did not cost a premium dollar and have that as part of the guiding principles for the project? That's the sort of work we're doing in Canada. We're doing a $85 million transitional housing and drug detox facility in Vancouver. And as part of that, the IPD team has committed to 10% impact sourcing at 0 premium capital cost, $8 million of capital spend with local social enterprises. And that's embedded in the risk reward structure of the IPD contract. So a really interesting space. And Marku, I think, or pardon me, Afdhel, sorry, I had an email here. I think it's really interesting to see how brands are driving change. You know, the conversation with the Redskins. In Edmonton, there's a football team called the Eskimos. There's a conversation going on around that. Why don't you talk about that for a moment before I share my story?
Yeah, so what's fascinating is the expectation of brands to get involved in fixing the problems of society has kind of already been well established in terms of sustainability, right? I think today every Fortune 500 company has a sustainability strategy, is conscious about their supply chain, making sure that the way that their products are made is carbon neutral, zero waste, you know, using clean energy. That conversation has been occurring for a while now. I think the thing which the George Floyd incident triggered was not just a complete review of how policing in the United States works and all the kind of dynamics around funding the police, militarization of police. It has also sparked a conversation around diversity and inclusion inside the boardrooms and C-suites of corporations. And it's kind of because of the ripple effect of Black Lives Matter. When these corporations publicly came out and said, hey, we believe Black Lives Matter, their reaction was pretty much, okay, well, what is the composition of your C-suite? What is the composition of your board? What is the diversity and inclusion pipeline that you have? How much is your investment into Black-owned businesses or minority businesses? It's summed up in this wonderful phrase, show me the receipts. I don't care what you say publicly, I want to see the proof. And so what we're now seeing with our clients is this massive internal conversation at every level of a company about this particular topic. And it is manifesting itself in all sorts of different ways. With the particular incident that Tim mentioned, so the Washington Redskins, the NFL team, have long been attacked for having a name that is outdated, racist, stereotypical, pick the adjective, all of those work. But they have fiercely resisted doing anything about it until FedEx, a bunch of their sponsors said, if you do not change your name, we will pull our funding. That was the tipping point, and that's why the team is now going through that review. So what's happening is that the ripple effect of the racial justice protests have created a sea change inside corporations themselves, and now that is rippling into where the corporations put their money and how they spend their money. And this is what is really fascinating about this moment. And I think that's really where there are now conversations that are happening, hard conversations and tough conversations happening inside companies about whether they are able to walk the walk, not just talk the talk as well. And so this is where there's almost a nice segue here to talk about the representation of Indigenous people. Tim, many people don't know this about you, but you are a person of an Indigenous background, right?
Yeah, no, I'm status Mohawk, Mohawks of the Bay of Quinte on the north shore of Lake Ontario. My great-great-grandfather was John Deseronton, a Mohawk war chief out of New York, and he fought with the British against the Americans in the War for Independence, and the Americans won, and the Mohawks had to go to Canada. So that's the story.
And so this is also kind of the reason I bring it up is because a lot of people don't know your personal history. They know you as the leader of Chandos, but one of the reasons you're so passionate about this idea of hiring people from underserved backgrounds is because you were one of those people, right? At the very beginning of your career. Can you just talk us through that story, please?
Yeah. So, I had been somewhat resistant to sharing this in my younger years, I guess I'd say, but I've become more open about it more recently. So I grew up in this world, this ultra-conservative, religious fundamentalist world where everything was to be feared. My father's an independent Baptist minister, to the extent of Westboro Baptist Church kind of line of thinking. And so I didn't see a television or watch television, I should say, until I was 14. I did not listen to anything that wasn't a hymn until I was about 15. I was homeschooled, could not hang out with the neighbor kids because they would corrupt me, taught not to get an education because that would corrupt me. This idea of fear the other was the environment that I grew up in. But my saving grace in all of that is that my mother taught me to read at a very high level at a very young age. So I'm living in the middle of nowhere in northern Canada. There's no computer games, there's no TV, there's no going to school. So what do? Well, you go to the library, and couldn't go to the fiction section of the library because that would corrupt me. So went to the nonfiction section. And I was reading Encyclopedia Britannica from cover to cover, all 33 volumes when I was like 9 or 10. I could read at a very high level at a young age. It comes from practice. And it just so happened that in that section of the library, the great classics were kept. So Plato, Aristotle, Machiavelli, Immanuel Kant's Critique of Pure Reason, even throw in some Dickens, Tolstoy, War and Peace, that kind of stuff. It was all in that part of the library. And I ended up smuggling that stuff home in between volumes of the encyclopedia, reading it under cover of darkness with a flashlight. And, you're 15 years old and, you're going to fight with your father anyways. That's just what kids often do. But there was something inside of me that said, this is not right. The hate and the fear is just not right. And so I left, and I was going to be in a cardboard box on the street if I didn't figure it out. And I just so happened at that point in time to get a full ride scholarship to study engineering at the University of Alberta through the Mohawks of the Bay of Quinte. I was working in a lumber mill and framing houses. I went and I hired a tutor at $40 an hour to help me figure out how to challenge the departmental exams in high school to get an 89% average was the cutoff to get this full ride scholarship. So we did that, and I got the scholarship. And right around that point in time, I also got a job at Chandos. And I was like a feral animal from the bush, for lack of a better term. I didn't have the best experience. I didn't have the best grades. I was alone by myself. But Chandos saw something in me and gave me a chance. And I don't know where I would be if it were not for that opportunity. And I found a second family, a deep sense of purpose with the organization, a community in the construction industry, and it's driven me for 20 years. And so I've been with Chandos since I was about 17. It's been 20 years now. It's an honor to be the president of the organization, sharing in the leadership responsibilities. And one of the things that we do that kind of connects to my story, but it's not entirely just because of my story. It's in the DNA of our organization. We hire at-risk youth. And so we can hire anyone to push a broom for $18 an hour on our job sites. And let's hire the kid that's on the bus 4 hours a day, back and forth, going to school, working 2 minimum wage jobs to put food on the table for a brother or a sister because mom and dad aren't around. Let's hire that kid and give that kid an opportunity. And when you do, they come to work with a big smile on their face. They have this passion about what they do. We put them in the apprenticeship program. General contractors in Canada pay for trades training for their people. Apprentice carpenters make $24-25 an hour on average. Journeyman carpenters make $39 an hour, depending on where you are in Canada. And foremen are north of that. And then there's a path to be a superintendent, a project manager. Our chief operating officer has a GED and came through the trades. His name's Sean Penn. He's a great guy, and I work very closely with him. And so we can take someone who's on a path towards crime and or poverty, and in a matter of 4 or 5 years, reverse that and give them a high-paying job and a sense of purpose and a community and a family in the construction industry. And it costs us nothing to do that. We were going to hire those people anyways. And so what impact sourcing is about is government waking up to the idea that general contractors and architects have this power. We can do that. And when we do that, we reduce the strain on the social system. That is good for society. And those organizations should be rewarded for that good through procurement practices. And so that's kind of the story. And I think it's a really powerful connection.
And I think when we look at the construction industry, this is an opportunity to really drive diversity, inclusion, equity on multiple levels, right? Because it's also about socioeconomic opportunities that you're giving these kids that coming into the industry. They're coming from rural backgrounds in some cases, right? So these aren't just inner city kids. These are kids from underserved backgrounds, but by putting them on that path, you help them, right?
Yeah, no, for sure. And, in Canada, it's really interesting. There's the demographics of the country. If we don't have a population of 100 million people by the year 2100, the country goes backwards in terms of our ranking on the G7 stage, and frankly flirts with bankruptcy because there's so many people retiring that someone's got to pay the tax bill. The only way to address that is immigration. And, in Canada, we've got politicians running around, fear the other, let's not let immigrants in. And I won't get into the politics in the United States, but without immigration, nobody's going to pay the tax bill. And part of what social procurement or impact sourcing is in Canada is this idea of getting new Canadians high-paying jobs in the construction industry, which has a labor shortage. And those high-paying jobs pay for all the baby boomers who are retiring and laying on a beach, sort of a deal. So, it's bigger than just one industry.
Thank you, Tim. And we're seeing some questions start to come in, guys. If you want to put questions into the chat, we're going to start answering them one by one. Tim, start with a question for you from Niall, who said, I was hoping Tim could explain more about how the IPD agreements define the specific metrics for impact sourcing, which you mentioned are directly related to the ICL. How do you define and measure a program like this?
Okay. So in Vancouver, British Columbia, the city of Vancouver has made proving that you did impact sourcing a occupancy permit requirement. You will not get an occupancy permit for the project unless you prove that you did what you said you were going to do when the owner received a development permit. And so the requirement on that particular job is to prove that more than 10% of all new jobs created by the project went to groups that are underrepresented in construction. In addition to that, 10% of all sourcing is local. That's easy to do in the construction industry. And then in addition to that, 10% of total spend on the project is done with a certified social enterprise. So it's an $80 million project. 8 million spend needs to be done with social enterprises. A lot of that spend has to do around day labor organizations, and there's quite a few of them in Vancouver. And frankly, with the IPD delivery method, it's radical transparency. You see all the numbers, you see everyone's books, you know that the mechanical contractor had $42 a man hour in for this scope. You carve that scope out and you say we can have some labor that's provided through a local social enterprise, and we can buy that labor at $39 an hour, and the productivity is the same. And here's the time cards, and here's proof that it didn't cost the taxpayer a premium dollar. That's essentially how it gets measured. And then what that particular team is doing is tying 10% of the ICL to actually hitting those targets, and it's an all or nothing. So if the team doesn't hit the targets, everyone gets a 10% whacking on the ICL.
And just a side note as well, what's also interesting, even though day labor, it tends to be the biggest chunk of that budget, you also extend impact sourcing into companies who might be providing food on site, right? Or
Yeah.
other, could you talk a little bit about those types of companies and how you support them?
Yeah, you know, it's crazy. We have 7 offices, and I had our accounting folks run a report on how much money we spend on catering, and it's like $600,000 a year or something ridiculous. And you know, why go buy your sandwiches for the job site from Subway, who's a good organization, when you can buy it from a local social enterprises that takes at-risk kids off the street, teaches them how to be a chef, and they create the same sandwich for the same price that tastes just as good, and you're accomplishing a social good by engaging those sorts of suppliers in the ecosystem. Catering is a prime example. There are lots of social enterprises in the mechanical insulating space, hoist and lift operators, crane operators, drywallers on a piecework basis, painters on a piecework basis. My comment here is that the social enterprise system, at least in Canada, is quite advanced. And when you go looking, you can find great organizations to partner with who do great work.
And I want to talk about another hidden benefit, right? Which is how it makes your employees feel to be helping to mentor some of these youth as well. And I think you've told me stories of contractors who've been veterans like 30 years, and the joy it brings them to be able to help somebody, to lift somebody up. Could you talk a little bit about that aspect of it, as well as being engaging and motivating?
Yeah, I think, you know, I don't, when I talk about purpose, I don't want it to be rainbows and lollipops and unicorns and, you know, save the trees and save the planet. Of course, we're going to save the trees and save the planet, but there's an ROI in here, and we're going to get paid for doing it while we do it. And the main ROI comes through productivity in people, and people in your organization want to feel that they are bigger, they're part of something that's bigger than themselves. And when they do that, their productivity just is off the charts. You know, so we have examples of self-performed concrete crews where we have 50% at-risk youth, or 30%, you know, Syrian refugees as an example. Those folks who show up and who are thankful for that opportunity that they have been given, they blow the doors off of all the other kind of regular employees in the organization significantly. And if you put together a drywall crew or a concrete crew that's comprised of people with that background, you will blow the doors off of everyone else in terms of labor productivity because of the passion that those people bring forward. So it applies, you know, at a self-perform level, and then it also applies, you know, globally in terms of the culture and the performance of the organization. It's all about feeling like you're part of something bigger than yourself.
And this is what I found interesting about impact sourcing. You don't really have to change anything inside your organization except where you hire people from, right? That's what makes it so adoptable, I think, as a practice for the construction industry. There isn't some complicated internal process. It's just your exact same process, but you just shift your view as to where the folks come from, right?
Yeah, absolutely, for sure.
Um, and let's talk a little bit about why there's been some resistance. What are the objections you get when you talk about this publicly? What are the kind of pushback?
Yeah, I won't use names in the Canadian context, but when I worked with a senator here in Canada on a piece of legislation called Bill C-344, which is about impact sourcing and selecting contractors on the basis of their ability to do so. Many in the construction industry stood up and said, how dare you tell us who we're going to hire? How dare you force us to hire new Canadians, LGBTQ, people of color, Indigenous, women in the trades? If you force us to hire from those groups, you're forcing us to choose from an inferior labor pool. They actually said that because their productivity will be lower than the other people's productivity. That has been overtly said in Canada. And we as an organization have stood up and said that's nonsense, to the extent there's been a lack of data around this. So on one of our projects in Vancouver, we've engaged a major university to undertake research at a cost consultant, an accounting firm, to audit the project and confirm that this trope that doing this costs the taxpayer more dollars is nonsense. So that work is ongoing right now. And we expect to present some research late this year, early next year, to prove that there is no premium capital cost of doing this. Now, the interesting thing, as soon as you start to talk about what it is, this, and you do research on it, you kind of have to define what it means to do it correctly. And that's another barrier. So there's this perception it costs more. And then the other barrier is well, how do you do it correctly? And so in parallel with the research that I just mentioned, we're working with a national charity in Canada to open source a guide to impact sourcing for the construction industry. And the approach will be, if you do it the way it's designed or the way it's laid out in this guide, we have research that would demonstrate no premium capital cost. We believe that that's going to be the outcome of the research for sure.
Thank you, Tim. So a question Margie had, which is, I'm curious about how the BC regulations requiring impact sourcing came about. Did they originate with politicians or with the construction field?
No. So the construction industry in Canada, I just remember when LEED was a thing in Canada, everyone recoiled in horror and said, how dare you tell us how we're going to design buildings? It originated with the charities in Canada. And the industry got dragged kicking and streaming down the path. I actually think that's the role of government in society, is to, I think actually, Afdhel, you mentioned this, it's private business raises the ceiling and government raises the floor. So this is government raising the floor. Frankly, it was a lobby group that represented most of the social enterprises in Canada. The social enterprises in Canada said there are so many more people that we could help if there was more demand for the kind of things that we as social enterprises deliver. And the response with impact sourcing is creating demand for the good work that social enterprises do. And infrastructure is a great place to do it because we spend lots of money, and we're one of the few industries where you can take someone with very little skills, plop them in, give them a good job, and just push them right through the system so they've got a high paying job and sky's the limit in a matter of years, right?
And so you brought up one of my favorite examples of, which is LEED, right? And oftentimes when people talk about the space and they say, what is the most successful certification globally that helps consumers think about buying, products and services that have a positive impact? And I say, it's not B Corps, actually it's LEED. If you think about the widespread adoption of that term by developers, by buyers, when you say to somebody, oh, this is a LEED Platinum building, they understand it and they're prepared to pay more for it, right? So even though it might have been something which was a hard kind of evolution, you're seeing the upside of it. And I think this is where, if anybody knows the LEED folks, I think they should add impact sourcing into the LEED qualification. as being a crucial part of it. So again, it's not just
Yeah.
how you made the building or what the materials are used, it's who made this building for you. And I think that you'll find that it makes LEED an even more powerful kind of certification process as well.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that in terms of kind of the leverage that can be achieved with more general contractors kind of taking in the lead. We entered this year with a sales target of 820 million, and we're probably going to be close to that. We have 7 offices and 500-ish employees. But everyone on this call will know that general contractors are only 10% of the total project cost, or maybe 12% or 15% on the high side. So the real opportunity here is for general contractors to work with their trade partners so that the trade partners can see the opportunity. So we have 500 people on our sites in our organization across Canada, but there's every day 5,000 people on our job sites, 10-to-1 ratio. And right now we have approximately 40 people in the organization that I would characterize as coming from a group that has barriers to entry to the construction industry. But if we could work with our trades to push that everywhere, that would go from 40 to 400. And Chandos is just one contractor in Canada. We're in the top 10 in terms of size, but if the top 10 all started to do the same sort of thing that we're talking about, you're talking about thousands and thousands of people that can be helped through this approach. So it's a really powerful concept to explore.
And thank you guys. The questions are coming thick and fast now, which is great. A question from Digby. Any examples of professional organizations bypassing colleges and raising up those without degrees and being successful? Many disadvantaged communities are shut out of the college system in the US. Tim, anything you want to?
Yeah, Digby, you can email me on the side and I'll have to confirm. But I do believe the British Columbia Association of Architects has a path to licensing that does not involve a university degree, and that involves work time supervised by a licensed architect. And that is particularly designed to encourage people from these sorts of backgrounds in the design industry. That's one that I can think of. There are other examples. I would have to follow up with a little bit more meaningful reflection to give you a good answer there.
And I'll jump in here as well. I think, what's interesting is in the United States, not specifically speaking to college degrees, but speaking to the topic of mass incarceration, right? So there are, this fact blew my mind. There are as many Americans who are incarcerated as have college degrees. Right? So this is not a tiny number of people. And when you look at the path to rejoining society and getting gainful employment, oftentimes having a criminal conviction is a huge barrier. That's why there's some really powerful movements in the United States, like Ban the Box, for example, which is a movement to ban that little checkbox on your employment application that says, have you ever been convicted of a criminal conviction? Removing that and as a stigma, as something which stops somebody from being considered for a job, is a simple thing that so many companies can get involved in as well. I'd highly encourage you guys to go and look at another company called Greyston Bakery. Tim has heard me talk about them as one of my favorite examples. Greyston makes the little chocolate brownies that go into Ben & Jerry's. So if you've eaten the Ben & Jerry's chocolate brownie, it was made at Greyston Bakery, which is upstate New York. Greyston not only has banned the box, but they have a policy called open hiring, which is if you show up and you put your name down, at some point Greyston's going to hire you without asking questions. They're going to find a job for you in the bakery. And I think it's really powerful to look at these as examples of moral imagination, of companies saying, why do we have to operate within this system that puts so many people down? There are ways in which we as corporations can bring people in from disadvantaged backgrounds, whether they're underserved or don't have college degrees or have been formerly incarcerated as well. We're really at the vanguard of something interesting happening here. Another question from Amir Sharif. Question on the VC's i.e. the fifth walls of the impact space. We're about to open the door to investors who share our values on construction operations, and are in stealth mode at the moment. Three Roots is an impact housing project under development in North Vancouver, in partnership with Chandos. It aspires to be the world's tallest affordable mass timber building. Question, who are the top 5 or 10 VCs who can be aligned with this? Tim, maybe go to you.
Yeah, Amir, I don't have a list off the top of my head. Of course, Fifth Wall comes to mind. But I think a better way for me to answer the question is to talk about the social impact bond raise that the City of Toronto just did. So Bay Street in Toronto went out to the market and syndicated a bond. Total value pushing $1 billion. And they syndicated that from Bay Street and Wall Street funds, hedge funds, impact funds, pension funds. And they raised about $1 billion that they're going to use to build transitional and affordable housing. And they set a record for the lowest cost of borrowing in the history of the City of Toronto, about less than 1% roughly. And so I've got some information on that. I think you're going to see some of the monster funds set aside cash for impact projects and push it out through a similar bond raise at almost no cost. And then there would be a, kind of a requirement to meet social impact targets as part of the project in order to qualify for money that cheap. But I see the big funds doing more and more and more of that. And so those with projects that really move the needle on society and local community, I expect will be able to access some very cheap money.
Yep. Another question Margie has about, can you talk about your work in changing the composition of the C-suite? So I'd say this is one of the hardest conversations that is happening inside corporations at the moment. And I think what's happening is, for the first time, two things are happening at the same time. And I'm just going to talk about it honestly because we're friends here. The first is a kind of lifting of the scales from the eyes of people seeing how much there is injustice against the Black and brown employees of their companies on multiple levels, whether that is pay equality, whether that is promotion opportunities, and most visibly in the composition of the C-suite. There are entire Instagram and Twitter feeds set up which just show you the C-suite composition, which is a sea of old white guys, let's face it. So that conversation is probably the hardest conversation that's happening at the moment, because at the same time as this kind of awareness of racial injustice is happening, there's a lot of guilt, I think, that's happening amongst employees who are not of color, right? And they're kind of slowly realizing how they have been the unconscious beneficiaries of privilege right throughout their life. And this guilt is now really also what is causing some honest conversations inside these companies to have happen. And I think the companies who are mature and wise enough to have those conversations internally are the ones who are going to be better equipped in the future. Because the truth is, in order for power to be shared, something needs to be given up. And I think that is the hardest thing for people who've worked hard all their lives to get to a certain point to say, why am I not being considered in the same way? Why is this other person who comes from a minority background being given special treatment, right? And I think that is where the work that needs to be done is also understanding the hidden benefits of privilege that have allowed people to get to this point. And understanding that, I think, then helps those C-suite teams realize how they need to set up a succession plan. Because the truth of the matter is, the more diverse you are as a company, the more profitable you are as a company. This is not me talking. This is the Harvard Business Review and numerous studies. Think about it in terms of resilience almost. The more diverse you have perspectives inside companies, the more you are able to identify white space opportunities, the more you are able to avoid making huge mistakes, which can wreck your reputation in seconds. And the more you are able to then create teams who are able to see around corners and problem solve differently. The diversity of lived experiences, so not just cognitive diversity, which is a buzzword, but true lived experience is really what makes companies stronger. So I think that's maybe the hardest conversation to have, because there's a lot of, listen, it's a financially rocky time, right? We're in the middle of a Great Depression that we haven't seen in our lifetimes before. So the idea of relinquishing power and giving over power is, I think, a really thorny subject. But I'll just say, those companies that have the wisdom and maturity to do it are going to be more resilient and more future-proofed down the line when it happens as well. Yeah, I hope that that helped. A related question, as from Digby again, as ingrained participants of the capitalist system, do you have any thoughts on the growing skepticism of capitalism among the youth in the United States? This is a real kind of like throwing bombs from the barricades question. I'll tell you what my thesis is. It's and you guys work in the technology business. The operating system of capitalism as we know it needs a upgrade. It needs a reboot. It's full of bugs. Things that were features are now bugs. So it's time to change the operating system. And our belief, a conspiracy, is that purpose is the source code you need to put into this next upgrade. By writing that into the code of the upgrade at every level, whether it's the products and services and how you treat consumers, whether it's how you treat employees, where they come from, it's how you work with investors. Today, if you are a CEO who needs to upgrade their company, you need to think about putting that into the core of what you're doing, kind of like what Chandos is doing as well. So I think it's essential. I think it's coming. I think that allows us to hang on to all the good things that capitalism gives us, but eliminate the negative outcomes and the externalities that so often happen as well.
I'll just add to that. I think one of the biggest problems in society is kind of the one-sided view. There's this idea that the definition of intelligence is the ability to hold two opposing ideas in your mind and reconcile the cognitive dissonance. That's design thinking. One of the best documentaries I've seen on this topic it's called The Pursuit. And Arthur Brooks is a well-known capitalist in the United States. But he's also known for his view that capitalism has raised millions of people out of poverty around the world. And his view is capitalism can be used as a force for good. It just needs to be reframed into a broader conversation that's more than just shareholder returns. And there's more to life than the Milton Friedman view of the world. And that needs to be broadened out. Brooks talks about if you're a Democrat, talk about how capitalism has raised people from poverty. And if you are a Republican, talk about how poverty needs to be addressed. What he's really saying is hold two ideas in your mind at the same time and be balanced. And I think that's really important in the conversation.
And I want to talk about one particular aspect of Chandos that I've always admired, which is you're employee owned. And I think this is also going to be one of the next frontiers that companies need to think about. What happens when your employees are your shareholders? So talk a little bit about the journey, Tim, the inspiration you had, with Mondragon, and how it manifests itself now in the composition of your company.
Yeah, I think that part of the solution is what I would call the democratization of corporations. And so there's a great economist named Richard Wolff. If you go find his videos and books, he did an amazing talk at Google one year. And it's about the democratization of the corporation. I actually have a video. I might circulate it to Margie. But when you think about it, Thomas Piketty wrote this book about the concentration of wealth in the super elite. And, you've got a corporation. A corporation has a board of directors that's elected by the shareholders. The shareholders are usually part of the 1% or the 0.1%. And they usually elect their buddies to be on the board. And the board makes all the decisions. And people are doing all the work. And you pay the absolute minimum that you must pay to the employees in the organization so they don't quit and go to one of your competitors. That's kind of how the capitalist system is set up. But when the shareholders are the employees, it's a completely different conversation. And when the employees who are doing the work have control of the company, it's a completely different conversation. So part of what makes Chandos very unique is we're modeled after Mondragon from Spain, the world's largest employee-owned cooperative. We are, to my knowledge, the largest certified commercial contractor that's a B Corp in the world. And the thing that is really different about us is that 65% of the voting stock, it's actually, we're an LP, so it's units, but 65% of the ownership in our company is held by carpenters and laborers and project managers and estimators. And we have a single class of voting shares. And so less than 35% of the control of the company is with executives. So when you're an executive, you have to behave a little bit differently in that kind of a company. And I think that's it's very powerful. It drives a kind of servant leadership is what I would call it within the organization. We are not here at the top of the organization calling the shots and using people as tools. And when we're done with them, throwing them away. We work for them. And that's I think the key to it moving forward is a shift of those sorts of ownership models. And just lastly on this one kind of a dirty little secret in the construction industry, there's lots of employee-owned contractors out there. But the dirty little secret is that the ownership is non-voting stock and the control of the corporation rests with the original family or people on the inside. Really blowing the doors open on that and letting everybody have a piece, I think is really important. So everybody has an opportunity to own a piece of Chandos after 1 year of employment. They have to buy stock and we finance them into positions over time. And ownership with the company comes with risk, and you assume the risk as an owner. And I think all of that drives long-term thinking and, frankly, adult behavior around the boardroom table.
Adult behavior around the boardroom table. What is that now? What would that look like? Not doing stock buybacks and private jets and caviar for breakfast. Tim, this has been fantastic. We're wrapping up now. Where would you advise beginning this conversation inside your company? People who aren't in the privileged position of being where Chandos is, how do you start?
Well, I think it starts with why does the corporation exist? Why do you exist? And Afdhel's a guy that can help you figure that out. But if you think you exist to create a profit, that's not where you need to be. I think a purpose around what social good does your organization hope to achieve in the world? I think it starts with that, and it has to be deeply authentic and aligned with the employees in the organization, and you can build it out from there. And I would say challenge yourself to get beyond, we're going to make a bunch of money, we're going to be profitable, and we're going to write a big check to a charity at the end of the year. That's great. And I think you should do that. But it's way more powerful if you ingrain into your business operations a social purpose and you solve some of the greatest problems in the world through your business operations, and you make more profit by doing that. Your people will feel connected to something bigger than themselves when they do that. So yeah, it starts with purpose, and it's got to be authentic. I think it's a broad conversation with the employees in the organization.
Afdhel, do you want to talk a little bit about how some of your clients have begun the conversation?
Oh, he's on mute.
I'm sorry. Yes. Yeah, sure. A lot of the clients that we work with are some of them are startups, so they're at the very beginning of their journey. And so there's an opportunity to work with a blank slate. But the vast majority of them are companies and brands that have been around for 100+ years. And oftentimes the process that we follow is going back to the roots, the origins of why was this brand created? What was the thinking behind the product? And embedded in that inception is oftentimes the clues to figure out what that purpose was. The creators, the founders, usually were trying to figure out some sort of problem in the world, that they lived in. And then it's really then about taking that and then adding the current context and looking at what we call the 5 C's. So we go and then we look at the consumers, so the people who are buying the product or service. What are their drivers? What are they interested in? We look at the competition and category. So we start to look at how you can differentiate yourselves versus everyone else that is out there. We look at what we call collaborators or coach brands. So this could be organizations who have a common purpose. These might be nonprofits. This might be, as Tim mentioned, the government in certain cases. And that allows you to create like an architecture of alignment as well. In some cases, we go and talk to challengers, which is the 4th C. So people who absolutely hate what you do, right? So we work with food companies who have nonprofit activists who are mad at them for plastic or sugar or something like that. Oftentimes going and talking to people who criticize you shows you the things you can do to become better, and then find a way to diffuse that criticism. And finally, we look at the culture, which is the 5th C. And this is where we start to use things like the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which is just a superbly useful framework of the 17 biggest problems in the world. And frequently by then aligning your company against one of those goals, it gives you the clarity to say, here's how we can measure what we're doing as well. The ROI of purpose, we could do a whole webinar just on that alone, but sometimes the problem is measuring it in the most accurate way so you can see progress against commitments. So it's not just a promise, but it's backed up by proof as well, And so putting all that together, that triangulation, that orientation allows us to then figure out, okay, here is the purpose of this company. With Chandos, it was we build better together. And that idea of build better is not just limited to buildings. It's building better companies. It's building better communities. And then the together part was also really important. Chandos is one of the most collaborative companies that we came across, whether it's IPD or just the way they do community benefit agreements. They talk to the communities that they're going to be part of and collaborate with them, So being able to take all of this stuff and then distill it down into a clear framework that ideally you could stop any employee in a hallway and go, what is the purpose of this company? And they go, this is it. That's what you want, because that's the point where it's internalized, where people then take ownership of it, and then they start to behave in ways that manifest that purpose. And that's when things get really exciting. That's the hallmark of truly purpose-driven organizations, whether it's Chandos or Tesla or Patagonia or Adidas, is that there's no daylight between what the company stands for and what the people inside the company believe in as well. So yeah, just a quick run through as to how we do it. Please reach out if you have questions. Hit me up on LinkedIn, or conspiracyoflove.co is the website if you want to go. There's lots of resources about the business case for purpose, the ROI of purpose, all of this stuff. I would love to help anybody if they're thinking about going on their own purpose journey as well.
Thank you so much, Afdhel. Thank you so much, Tim. This has been such a enriching and actually very hopeful conversation in a time when we all need a lot more hope in our lives, I think. So this concludes CIDCI's online salon. Thanks for joining us. We'd like to announce that CIDCI's Fall Forum will be reconfigured as a set of daily webinars in early October. Speakers and invitations forthcoming. You can sign up to receive notifications of these salons by subscribing at CIDCI.org. Thanks for joining us as always. If you have thoughts or comments, reach out to us via CIDCI's website Contact Us link. And special thanks to Monica Zwissler for keeping us on track, and Tim and Afdhel for an amazing presentation. Thank you all so much, and be safe and see you soon.
Thank you for having us, Margie. Thanks, Monica. Take care now. Bye-bye.
Right on.